So, just a couple announcements before we begin. The first thing is that we have a new director of research. His name is Lawrence Green, and he's going to be the guy that you really go to after you go to me when you need questions answered about the strategies for the PhD. So in other words, he's running the PhD program for the whole BIAD. And he's lovely. He's going to come here next week and introduce himself, just so you know. Okay, so, and all things are good. Yeah. That's the first thing that I wanted to say. What is that? The drawing.
What?
That drawing there.
That's the duck rabbit, right?
That, of course.
That's the duck rabbit.
Which can also be a blow dryer.
Okay.
Okay, so the second thing is I bought this because when I go to garden centers with my partner, I'm not really into the garden stuff. Luckily she is, but I find things there that I find are fabulous. And this is the next thing I found. I want to share it with you because I think that if we're doing something that's really difficult and you're having a difficult time, you can just squeeze it and I can know that your brain is like overheating. You know, it can come out of your eye and everything. It's really great. You know, so I just thought this was perfect for the PhD students. So we'll just lay it on the table. I'm sorry.
Do you not see us doing that as it is?
Yeah, I do. But I just want you to know that you know, you could also play around. It's really gross. After I bought it, I thought, God, that is just wrong. Yeah. You know, but I still bought it. You know, I still wanted it. So there you go. It also feels creepy. Okay. Now, the other thing is that I need to see you all. I need to start setting up a structure where we can see each other privately on your PhDs. This semester, the best times for me to see you are on Thursdays in the morning, or in fact, pretty much all day on Thursday, because for whatever reasons, the environment is such that because the PG Cert is happening on Wednesday, I'm free on the Thursdays more than I would have been. So if you can send a schedule around starting next week, that would be great. Obviously I can't meet you tomorrow unless you want to come to London on the 7:10 first class ticket. I'm just kidding, that's at night actually. So that's that. So sorry, I didn't do there. And then we're missing a number of people, are we or not? No. Grace is talking.
Greg's not here, is he?
Greg's not here. He sent his apologies, and Jacqueline sent her apologies. Is that it? Is that our crowd? No, he's not here. He sent his apologies. Couldn't make it today. I think that's it. Then we're good to go. Everybody else fine? Okay. Very good. So let us start again. On where we are getting with this moment of thingness. But before we do, I would like us to one more time introduce ourselves. This time, however you want to introduce yourself, really. So Jakob, I'm going to begin with you because you're writing and busy.
Just giving it time.
Oh no.
I'm Jakob. I am PhD candidate. I do art sometimes, more often than anything else. I'm interested in photography, movies, short videos, I call them, because I don't think they're full-blown videos. I think they're quite short and I like it that way. Yeah.
It's like developing the short story.
There is something about shortness of things. Which sounds completely dirty now in my head.
Oh, stop! Or
And
don't
I'm
stop, or something.
Be quiet now.
Okay, thank you very much. He sinks down into the chair and turns purple.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Andre. I'm on the MA currently, first year part-time. First year of part-time year two. I'm getting confused. Sorry. Currently gorging myself on the MA feast.
Which was mad last night, wasn't it? We improved, I thought.
Yeah, it was kind of like just whispering, it's a singularity at the end that I think might have set off a bit of fireworks.
Oh, good.
But it's good.
Good, good. Okay, excellent.
I am doing my PhD, second year, the beginning. I am trying to work out how to break down into chapters my study so I can be more efficient. And at the moment, I think that the most important point is a distinction between causality and necessity on one side and possibility on the other as a way to get to...
So you're thinking that possibility is in contradiction to?
No, not in contradiction. It's a different way to get to the sense of the sensual.
The sense of the what?
No, the sensual.
Okay.
Because I think...
But when you say on the one side, on the other side, what do you mean? Is that just a matter of speaking?
No, yes, it's just another case. One chapter will treat first with the problem of
Oh, I see, right.
causality and necessity, and then the other one will address how this is hinged on possibility or openness.
Okay. So how are you dealing with uncertainty then? Is uncertainty part of possibility?
Uncertainty is an aspect of possibility, which I am somehow I see uncertainty or undecidability as very interesting but highly problematic at the same time.
They're not the same thing.
No. Uncertainty comes even somehow chronologically and logically even earlier than understandability. And I find that they tend to be repeated so much that they almost become entities in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I am trying to learn how to think with these concepts as empty.
Mm-hmm.
So then they are exactly what they are. So this is why I call it possibility, and then I aim at calling it openness in the end.
Right. Good. Okay. Get there. A feedback loop.
That's the most important thing. Yes.
Well, I'm Oscar, I'm a visual artist, and now I'm really confused about the topic of my research. But yes, I'm interested in the truthfulness of photography, although the truth is not possible in any field, so I don't know if photography is the best way to make that evident. And I try to, I'm trying to do photographs, video, or augmented reality, social media, and try to mix up everything, find out a new way to talk about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Dane. I research ideas of dualities and undecidabilities in primarily real-time systems with an aim of developing methodology dealing with time in environments with instantaneous feedback. I also deal with simulation of experience, I review films, and I occasionally do artwork.
Oh, and what type of artwork?
I call it digital, but it bleeds. It's bleeding digital.
Would you call glitch part of the bleed?
It can have, yeah, glitch can play a part of it, yeah.
And do you know Lee Smolin's work on Time Reborn?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Look.
Good. Excellent.
My name is Lauren.
Louder.
My name is Lauren, and my work is turning around the notion of event. And I'm feeling quite confused. Just right.
You really what?
I'm feeling a bit nauseous and confused.
Excellent.
And kind of
Speak anyway.
expanded from 2
Project.
days to do something else. So I'm feeling like really disconnected from like what is my research. I can't even remember. I can't think straight. But what I suppose what I think I could say is that in terms of like I've been exploring the notions of event that are like of interest to me or I think are important, and then I'm sort of wanting somehow something to come out of that in which is sort of to speak, to find out what could be said, not to decide what I want to write. I want to sort of like when you write, you should not know what you have to say. So I want to find out something in that way. So I wasn't just thinking about the process of.
But then there's 2 different forms of knowing that you're settling on. One is the sterilized ratio of knowledge, which is the one that you're objecting to. And the other is a kind of knowledge that allows you to say things, or to begin to at least point to them, that have some form of meaning. In the latter case, I would say that's what makes work of art work. In the former case, if you put the former one as a piece of work to art, then you can destroy a piece of work of art. So your worry, your concern about rationalizing knowledge is strong and good and appropriate, but don't confuse that with having a way to articulate something. 'Cause that's the best way a student can get sort of held up in their research. And I know that in certain universities where I was an external, I mean, students have gone to the externaling side of things and have presented, just porridge basically, and said, well, that's what the thesis is about, and that can't quite work, because what you do, this is not criticism what you're saying, because a lot of people confuse this or don't realize there's a big difference. But in thinking through projects, one of the things that ought to help you organize your thoughts is, in what way am I adding a significant dimension to the field? What is it? What's the hunger that I'm speaking to?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Good.
It is like that something's at stake, something's important, but it's also like being alert to that. It's sort of like that isn't predetermined.
Right.
So it's like trying to be alert to that rather than just sort of.
So does Kierkegaard figure into your work, like the whole question of attunement?
Well, I think I do need to read the Kierkegaard. I've read that bit of Trended not very well. I should probably give that a good read.
Give it another go, because I think with the problem of trying to get rid of God as because that always trips people up, because of the way it's written, you might miss the way in which he's trying to understand attunement, and sort of observing with the ear, that kind of thing, rather than the eye. So it's a very important move that he makes around secrets and how you don't have to know ahead of time what needs to be known. And this relationship of faith and belief that he gets into, but you can call it something else, call it art, for example. Okay.
My name is Natalia, and I'm looking on unseen body in contemporary fashion. And at the moment I'm searching ways how to actually articulate this.
So you two are doing the same project, basically. Excellent, well done.
So I'm trying to look in how other field made the experiments on certain things.
Great, okay, excellent, thank you. And you're doing the PG cert right now too. Excellent. Good. Samira.
Samira, I'm a painter. Sorry.
No need to apologize for being a painter. Just a need to apologize for apologizing, but then it gets completely crazy. Yeah.
I'm interested in the process of blurring.
Great. The process of blurring.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Okay, excellent.
Sorry. I'm Mark Walker, postdoc. I've never really kind of given a proper account of myself here, so I thought with your permission I'd just tell a story. So I started late last Friday, about 4:30, I was being grilled by a government agent as to my capabilities. He was telling me some new government buzzwords and what are you capable of doing. So he's saying, can you pick up rubbish? Basically saying, if you don't get a job soon, you're going to be picking up rubbish. It's a threat. But I said, this threat's wasted on me because I already pick up rubbish. So I turned and I said, do you pick up rubbish? No, I don't pick up other people's rubbish. Now, we both have the same desire, probably, of a clean environment. but we have a different image of self. This image of self enables or disables a course of action. In a way, I was thinking this agent, he kind of wants to take responsibility for my taking responsibility for someone else's irresponsibility, which is itself a response. It's like a picture inside a picture, or maybe a picture with a picture inside it and a picture inside that. So, how did I get to this image of self? Well, in 1983, I was living in squats in Brixton and Clapton in London, and my parents got in touch with me. I hadn't spoken to them for a year. Would I like to come back to Kent, live in the country? And change is good. So I went back to Kent and joined the countryside again. Beautiful and stuff. But I found myself recoiling rubbish, disgusted. So it's a beautiful disgust. I thought, I cannot go on like this. So I thought, we need to get our hands dirty. So I decided we'd go down the tip. We go down the tip, it's about 1.5 miles across the fields. This wasn't unusual back in the day for people to go down the tip. It was before the advent of razor wire and fences. So what was unusual, I was going down there at night. So I'm down there amongst the mountains of rubbish. You can learn a lot from people's waste. And I started collecting things. One of the things I was collecting were doors.
As you do.
As you do. I found a wheelbarrow and I would tie the door to it, trundle it across some farmland, along the motorway, maybe went over a railway line, through a wood and through a little bit of village to my shed. I had a shed, all in the dark. We don't have street lights where I come from. And in my shed, you'd open the door and then you'd be presented by another door. You'd open that door, step inside, and you'd be surrounded by doors. One of these doors didn't make it to the shed. It got trundled up the hills, what we call up the hills on the map says North Downs, where I proceeded to hang it onto a smallish tree, didn't it? So it was hanging this door in space in an obscure part of the wood. Did I get feedback from this? Yes, I did. 3 years ago, I was at my sister's Christmas, late in the evening with family and friends, lovely fire, some mince pies, a bit of drink, you know, everyone telling stories. And Pete, we'll call him Pete because that was his name, and Pete was at that time the head conservator of books and manuscripts at Canterbury Cathedral. He was a conservator, married to a is that the right word? Conservator? Yeah, conservative books. Married to a Swedish conservative books and stuff. And he started telling the story of when he came across the mysterious door in the woods. Everyone knew it was mine. You know, everyone's known for 22 years. It was me, but he's telling the story again. You know, and this good story, and he's since moved to New Zealand, where he's probably still telling the story of the mysterious door in the woods. It's a good story. Now, the door, is it rubbish? Is it excremental? No, I think people come across it with surprise, not disgust. Is it art? No, it's not art, because art tends to be assimilative. It tends to document. It's too Hegelian. It's too sublating, you know, sublation. It wants to raise up too quickly. It's too quick. So it's like an octopus with extended tentacles. Wants to grab everything and suck the life out of it and dead next thing. So what is the door to me? The door to me, this door was an oak door, green, with algae on it. It was an outside door, like for a passage, not a door for a house. So the door to me, it's accumulative. I think it's a system. I think it's an illumination. It's illuminative. I think it brings to light the light it brings. And I think that's why I'm not an artist. And I think that's probably enough of me telling you about my capabilities.
And what did this guy say?
Well, he only got the bit as far as I pick up rubbish.
Oh, I see. The whole train story. Well, that's a shame, really. That would have been fantastic.
At one point he did jump up and nearly run out the door and say, if you embarrass me in front of my staff, you know, when you were going to fall out. So,
that is brilliant.
but
That's very helpful.
If you need any more, if you want
No,
any
but
more
that's
stories
interesting
from
about the
that,
comment
yeah.
about that art may, in the way you're posing it, that you're saying you're not an artist because one of the things that you're interested in doing is bringing an object's light to life. And I find that interesting. Why would or would not that be an aspect of art?
I think it's just because art is that Hegelian moment that wants to sublate very quickly. It wants to raise art. Maybe this is like a tie, so arguing against the surrealists.
Yeah, it is. And certainly Heidegger arguing against it. You are becoming a
I
Heideggerian.
think,
I'm scared.
I don't usually do this kind of thing on humans.
Yeah,
I think, I've got more stories from it, what I want to call the unexamined life.
yeah, good. Matthias?
Can I found, because Mark was mentioning this before at the seminar, I find your description of not being yet an artist precisely the most interesting part of the art making process, where something or the moment has got just enough information, just enough logic to raise doubts and questions without yet directing in any direction. So your hanging door is an enigma, and for me it's all it takes to keep thinking of it, which is what
And that to me is what art is about.
Yeah.
So, but I come at that from a, I don't know if you want to call it a Heideggerian move, but I would say leotard maybe, or whomever, maybe it's our seminar move, maybe we're inventing a new move.
Well, yes, I was going to say Stuart MA part-time, and I can't follow that.
Did you know me and Stuart went to the same
we
school?
No!
Yeah.
Which school was
I'm
that?
baffled now as to what they would have made at the time.
I was 22.
What, when you were at school?
No, no one needed the door.
That was brilliant. So,
But yes, it's true.
would you like, you know about the door as well?
I don't know, no.
Oh, okay.
I could have made up a story about I was wandering on the downs, but no. That would be quite weird, actually. Yeah.
I'm not interested in what degree you're doing, I'm interested in your research.
Yeah. Well,
So,
just
sorry.
as an aside, I've been reminded this week that I'm in an anachronism of about 150 years standing,
Excellent.
which is fine. So that was
What anachronism is that?
just sort of some of the stuff I'm thinking I'm finding out, and then I find a reference, and somebody wrote about it in 1890 or something.
Excellent.
Oh, right, okay.
Takes a long time to find out things.
Yeah, I know. My brain works slowly. But more seriously, probably similar to several people talk about almost trying to put a form to something and realising that's the wrong thing to be doing. The idea of what, not what, but how, which I think comes up in this as well. And I was also reading, it's not bad, which way around is it? Foucault, Deleuze on Foucault, where he's talking about stratified.
And the cartographies.
Yeah, but particularly the chapter on stratification, where he's talking about power and realising that power is not a form, and that you need other things. So talking about vulnerability is what I'm sort of going way back pre-PhD to my research in practice on the MA. So it's I mean, part of it's the game of writing the essay, but it's sort of imagining that vulnerability as a form and how do you recognise it. It's moving on to more sort of accepting it and using it, and how other artists have done that, really.
Great. Interesting. Okay.
I'm Kate, and I'm very happy this week because performance philosophy, comedy and tragedy subgroup have accepted me onto their committee.
Wow.
And I'm trying to rewrite a curriculum to teach undergraduates the canon of theatre from the ancient Greeks right through, with a focus on comedy and tragedy, which I'm really interested in.
And what is that canon? What would you say? How would you describe it?
It has to have the Bacchae, and it has to have Agamemnon. It has to have, I've just seen Titus Andronicus, so it has to have that in it. And it has to have the post-modern dramatists of the 90s, the Sarah Kane's, Crimp, Edward Bond, of course, who we're getting an honorary degree to tomorrow.
And what's the degree in?
It's just an honorary.
A PhD, is it?
An honorary, yes, I think it's degree of letters or something. And he keeps emailing me because he's having palsy, because although he's a dramatist, he can't stand on a stage. So that's where I am.
Okay, very good, excellent. Okay, let us begin. We have been wandering around this question of thing and the way in which the different methods or the different approaches, I don't even want to call it a method at this point, deal with it. What I wanted to do today was give a kind of very short, like fingernail, thumbnail, or what's called, tiny discussion on sort of laying out Wittgenstein on the one hand and Heidegger on the other, not as oppositions and not as friend or foe, this kind of thing, but just to get another handle on it. But before I do that, I wanted to clarify something that I wasn't sure if you understood or if you did understand that you knew what to do with. And that is the notion of continuity. I want to make sure that we have this sense of what makes something continuous. What is it that if you talk about something that's linear, what does that really mean in terms of saying that everything has a continuity to it? Because that's usually what the next thing is, as opposed to a kind of digital or non-linear, which means that there's separations. There's like discrete separations. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because eventually I want to get us to be comfortable with this term singularity, famous singularity word, which I do think that Wittgenstein and Heidegger in their different ways were approaching as a way to rethink ground and the groundlessness of ground, something like that. And in that context, I wanted to say that if you think of a line in your mind, you're thinking of a line is in your head, and then you think that the line is made up of points. Are those points that make up the line separate from each other? Or is it one point that's been stretched long? Like, does the line itself have something that makes up its line? Or is it a stretched thing, however small that thing is? And I'll tell you, I'm asking you this because this is important for the concept of time. It's important for the concept of space. It's important for the concept of dialectics. It's important for the concept of duration, of simultaneity, of coincidence. There's lots of things that this is layering. Mattia?
No, I was just asking, was to clarify the question. So you're asking if a line can be broken down into further elements.
Is a line in your mind made up of points? Or is a line one point that's been stretched?
I remember from elementary school.
Well done.
When I was learning about what the line is, a
Okay.
mathematical point of view, it's
Okay.
a gathering of the points, and they don't have beginning and don't have end. That's what it was. But then every single point that creates a line would be a line itself as well, wouldn't it? So even if you zoom into the line, it's
To the
just
point.
to the point, it's still going to be a line, wouldn't it? It's just not. If you imagine a line as a series of points that are so tight together that they appear to look like a line from in math, then even if you zoom into one point, this one point is still going to be a line, wouldn't it? Would not.
Okay, so far,
So we both would have a stretch point
and individual points.
and individual
Something like
point. But if you cut the line, you have half line because it has an end.
So you take a pair of scissors and you cut the line.
Yeah.
Okay, you were saying no?
I don't think, if to look into the line as three-dimensional things, it might be stretched, but I think actually it's continuous dots.
So the dots are discrete dots,
Yes, it's very close dots,
very close dots, so close that they make a line.
yes.
Okay, so but you could look at it really under a
It
microscope.
still
You
will be
could,
dot, it wouldn't be a line.
so a line is not a dot. I mean, pardon me, a line is not really, there's no such thing as a line, there's only dots.
Yes.
But in between the dots, you've got the expectation of the next one and the next one. So you've got a pattern. The dots form a pattern. Which,
So the pattern is
so
the
you
line.
fill in the gaps and make the line.
So
your
so
expectation.
the thing called a line is actually made up of intentions or predictions of where the next dot is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, Jane?
The line is a set of points. In set theory, it's all the points between x equals 2 and 5. They're all part of the same set. But in your set theory, it gets a bit complicated because there's no real.
There's no set overarching the set.
And it's difficult to sort of find a beginning and end. If you
In
think
fact,
that-
it's impossible. In fact, it just doesn't make any sense to talk about beginnings and ends.
in sets,
Well, I'm kind of thinking now there's one more line has one more quality. Between 2 points there can be only one line. And one point can be part of infinite amount of lines. But between 2 points there's just one line.
One straight line.
on a straight line.
Well, can it be?
Yes. Yes.
Are you meaning a bit like in sort of in fractals though? Is that what you mean by the lots of points? Like you keep going in, so as an overall it's making a certain shape, but as you keep, is that how you're picturing it? So you said about the dots, and then you look in more dots. Is that what you mean? So you could have an arcing line like that, but in great detail it might be going like that, but it still is sort of in this progression.
See, I'm asking you this question, as you can probably surmise, because I'm worried that at the level that we're at, which is PhD and post-PhD and post-post-PhD and all the rest of that, that we take as a given the notion of linear in this notion of continuity, which is correct, but we don't know what the word line or in fact continuity actually means. So I want to just clarify it now. Anybody else?
In my,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have several answers to give to the question.
Your first line.
First, the line. I should say that the intuitive reaction is that the line is not a sequence of points, nor a stretched point. The line is a line.
Dear.
That is, it's a direction, it's a movement, it's a speed. It's not. It's dynamic rather than static. In this sense.
So that would be re-articulated as a line as a statement.
Yes. Or yes, the statement could be a good way of presenting it. Or the intensity of a speed, how fast something goes, something like that. The amount of energy that is in something. However, since you asked a question in reference to linearity and linear or continuity, I think that it is then the line becomes a metaphor for something else, which is some sort of unique sequence which cannot be otherwise than how it is.
So are you suggesting that a line is a metaphor to start with, and it's standing in for a sequence?
Yes, if we think of it in reference to linearity, yes.
Why?
Because, but since you also mentioned time in this question, I'm thinking of the analysis and the criticism that Bergson develops against the image of time we have in the current way of speaking and thinking, which is a line going from past to the future through the present. And he thinks of the present, he says that the way we think of the present is a sort of sliding stream that moves along this line, and constantly we are sitting on it, but we know what's past, but it prevents us from seeing ahead into the future. So it is moving thing. So that would be a linear form of time. Whether there is a point of origin or a point of end or not, it's not that relevant. But the flow of time and the experience of time happens as this movement along a predetermined line. And he sees...
so a predetermined... So
yes.
Is this a line?
Yeah, it's two.
Is this a line? Is this a line?
It could be.
Okay.
I'm wondering whether a line is
Has line for its own.
As a unit or as a measure, anything.
This is a line because you're absolutely certain it's a line because of why. It's straight. Right? That's why. And you're not thinking this is a line because it looks like an object.
It's a metric. Line, as soon as you have a line, you're into a unit of measure or metric.
Does it has direction just?
Okay, but if the line were this little point, which is what you said, that the line is only a point doesn't have a direction.
Set of
Oh, a set of points. Oh, now we're back to Dane's thing, that it's a set.
and also you see it's rather longer. It has very slim and very
Very thin.
dimension,
bits.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
right. Yeah. So a line can't be thick; it can only be thin.
I mean, if it's become there, it will be a rectangle rather than a line.
So if I took this and I
Definitely.
stretched it out, it would be a plane.
Okay.
Or oops, sorry.
I was thinking about something to do with an energy or active quality to it, so it's constantly.
Going in a direction. So
Yeah.
a point, just a little innocent little point, just sort of sitting there hovering, wouldn't be a line unless you look very closely and notice it was all squished up.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, when you said plane,
Mm-hmm.
line, if you imagine plane,
Yes.
flat plane,
Yes.
the line cuts the plane.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's the plane, and you do a
So
line.
these are all descriptions of what a line can do, but we haven't
Yeah.
gotten to what a line actually is. Yeah, Oscar?
I think the line is, it's like, or one point movement because of the time or because of other aspect. Describe a line, or we could be the distance between 2 points. That is the traditional.
Yes,
discrete
we
stuff.
got that one. That was
Yeah.
a straight line, though.
Yeah,
Was
exactly. But I
filled
think
in. Yes.
it's as well a question of the line is creating our mind. If we see 2 points, we
Well, the
directly-
shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line,
Yeah.
but that, this could be a line.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if it's like this or like this, it doesn't really matter, does it? Or like this.
This is more like the.
Now it's not a line. You're objecting to this particular line. If you're able to bend it. Then it's no longer a line. It's transformed into a circle. See, I'm worried, because how are we going to discuss linearity if we can't get past this little bit? James?
Isn't that line just a name for that infinite movement between?
Okay, so
points?
let's say the line is the name for an infinite movement of points going in a specific set of directions that are predictable. You can agree with that one?
That's not a vector.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, want to give it a go?
I suppose a bit different, but I think everyone's a Kantian. Everyone's describing how Kant describes a line. It's from a categorical, it's from a present in hand, thematical kind of understanding of a line, of Wittgenstein.
Wait, before you go into it, where does Kant say this?
At the beginning of that book there,
And that book there is called?
The Critique of Pure Reason.
Okay, so I'll just say more or less where it's from, so they can get a, because I think it's important.
It's right at the very front in the introduction.
Okay, and to repeat what Marcus said, Kant is talking about the relationship of categories, which become absolutely central to the argument of what it becomes to, quote, show something, or, I'm not going to use the word represent, but secretly I'm meaning represent. Okay, can you go on about that? Can you now say, so just repeat the Kant thing, what Kant is saying.
What Kant's looking at from what Heidegger and Wittgenstein would say is the present hand, when you're staring at the thing, trying to get closer to the essence of the thing, and the thing just keeps proceeding, you're not guessing that, everyone's got to, it's going round and round and round. And these guys are going to try to make you understand that how you use the line in your, as Oscar was nearly getting to, I think, is how you use the line in your language game or your conversation is how you're going to understand line. I'm always suspicious of how people think of line, thinking images anyway. And the examples that I always give of this, is if you have a student, so you issue them all a piece of paper and then you say to them, look, everyone knows what a horse looks like. Picture a horse in your head, everyone knows what a horse looks like. Okay, then can you just draw me which way the back legs bend? If that's the right one.
Yeah.
Now, as a horsey person yourself, you know which way the legs. But if you go round and they can all see the horses and which way the legs bend, and they do or they don't get it, and most of them do or don't get it. And if they all get it, you just change the animal. You all know what a dog looks like. You all know what a giraffe looks like. Which way do the legs bend? They see it in the line. Yeah, I can see it. So this idea that you can actually see these images and pictures in the mind as you're describing as this kind of born again geometry or something is quite suspicious, I think, and I think that and non-linear has never been a word that I've ever really used, never really wanted to get into or use, but it is very popular in say essays. Very.
Well, don't worry about that side yet. We are going to use it for today. I want to try and get a sense of let's put it like this. Alongside the question of line versus point versus vector versus category versus plateau is also the question of uni, oneness, and multi, many. So universal and multiversals. And they're not unconnected to the question of the linearity and the non-linearity. And this is where it's very important that you begin to see how this is all either intersecting or not intersecting or somehow having a relationship. So a universal means basically what? Does anybody?
There is one system,
And that system is
containable.
It's containable, predictable.
Describing all before,
and it's predictable, describable, existable at any point, at anywhere, at any time. That's what makes it universal, right? So what is this thing about multiversal? Why is multiversal considered the next best flavor of the month? Why is multiversal now on the agenda as a way of thinking things through?
That's a radical difference.
What's that?
That's a radical difference.
Of course it's a radical difference. What is the difference?
Well, asymmetric, asymmetricity, rather than so it's not it doesn't relate to a closed set.
So warm, very. So something about being asymmetrical.
So at times, the unfolding of time
is or is not.
Is asymmetrical.
Is it? The unfolding of time is asymmetrical. Fine.
Because it may not happen.
Okay, so it's always a surprise whether or not it happens. It's always a surprise that, I mean, I know living in this country is always a surprise that there's going to be winter, for example. You know.
Well, there's the sort of chronological sort of time, chronological time, sort of is the measure of representational time extension.
And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a representational time?
It needs to create units to have the closed set where you can count the points on a line to create the representation.
See,
of the
we're
points
going to
on
get back
the
to the line. Yes, right, good.
Whereas like the other thing we were talking about.
Multiversal.
I've lost what I was saying.
Asymmetric.
No, it wasn't. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it was. It's back.
Mark?
It's the multiversal, like, say, would you like the spirit world? You know, Canton's Swedenborg.
Yes.
We're looking at Swedenborg can talk to spirits, and these spirits are any spirit. They're out of time in the sense that they can talk to any past death thing. From any part of, it doesn't matter where they come from, but it's just a question of which voice is talking, and they can combine together. So they live in this kind of separate universe alongside our universe, and Swedenborg is able to challenge these spirits from any time and any space. They just kind of accumulate, and then they bring them together as a voice. And Kant, his tone of voice is really dismissive of this, but one recent translations points out that there's a kind of parallel between Kant and the spirit world in the sense that it resembles the petition between the noumenon and the phenomenon,
yes.
Phenomenal world. I was just wondering if the multiversal then is like the positioning within the spirit world, that it is not a regular Newtonian Euclidean,
Like
geometrical.
predictable.
Yeah, which is the Kant's understanding, Newtonian Kant's understanding. And I'm just wondering if that is maybe, I'm struggling towards this understanding of the multiverse myself. Is that the kind of understanding how, and that's almost like a parallel to the Heideggerian idea of the being space-ish and time-ish, again, not being the geometrical understanding of space and time, but existing in another way, having a distance, but or voice. When you start to try and describe it like this, then you end up heading towards that present in hand, that thematical definition kind of understanding, which actually takes you away with what you're trying to say here, which is that these things make more sense when you're using them in a kind of conversation which you're kind of familiar and happy with here. And of course I'm groping towards a language game which is a new kind of understanding here, and which tends to turn it into a task. I'm just wondering if that is anything like what your understanding, which will be, I'm sure, is much more based in the physics, nuclear physics, well, again, I don't know, it's a language.
No, I would say, first of all, just to backtrack, my sort of inroad into it is it deals with quantum physics, but it's basically it deals with entanglements. So I was going to put that in parentheses, just you've heard the word entanglements. But it's a very complex word.
Well, I understand Bell's theorem and how that entanglements, and how our understanding isn't an understanding, because if it is, the Einsteinian mathematical physical realists who think that everything can be understood, against those who say, well, look, the sums don't add up. I don't know if people know Bell's theorem, entangling particles that break the speed limit. Basically, they break the light, the speed of light, and of course, as we understand it, things can't do that. So either we've got the sums wrong, or the picture wrong, or there's something wrong. And there's two kind of schools in the science. Those that, like Einstein think God doesn't play with dice.
The famous spook.
And then those that think no, we've got something wrong. But really, they're still scientists. They still go about their methodology in the same way. If something is X, if you do Y to it, and P as a result. So it's a kind of esoteric argument amongst the two schools, amongst.
But let's hold off on that, because I think that so many people haven't read enough physics, including myself in this case, that to have a proper discussion of it at this point is just going to move the goalposts a little bit, and I don't want to do that yet. What I want to make sure people are getting a sense of is when you talk about line, linear, there's a kind of logic that is implied or expressed, so it's not necessarily just implied, around this term. And that logic is usually what people understand as logic, that there's a continuity that involves predictability, probability, certainty, these kind of words, so that the notion of truth, following from this kind of remark, is coming from a logic that is based in a form of linearity, whether or not that form has points, dots, sets, stratospheres, and so on. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is when one thinks the so-called multiversal, which is supposed to be completely other, how does one actually think the completely other than the line? Because the line is very profoundly effective. The line can be this statement, I'm learning my lines. Right? The line is made up, it could be made up of verbs and adjectives and so on. It could be made up of pockmarks and whatever makes up the set. It could be this chronos. Of course, Deleuze speaks of the what's the other form of time? The aeon. What's curved time? Does anybody know what curved time is?
Well, very, very deep, if I can.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into heavy
It's the
physics.
fact that rather than time being the abstract, straight, eternal line that we imagine,
The chronos.
the chronos, it is something that cannot be separated from space, and it is ruled by gravity in a certain way. So if there is a lot of mass here, whatever happens, actually all that is not just happening straight as it is like here, it moves around. To give you a visual example, not very differently than having waves in water going across a rock, they just bend. Something like that happens. So for example, light, when it travels in space, if there is a massive enough object, doesn't go like that, it goes by this. So,
Okay.
So for example, a star that is very far away, we see it there, but it's probably over there. But saying it is probably over there already is a paradox. We can't really say it would be over there, because for us it is what we see. So that's...
Okay, we're getting warmer. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is, can you really get out of linear logic, is really what I'm asking.
I think that like the question of random comes in with this sort of like, in contrast to like the metric line with the points of the sequence. If you think of like the random kind of, well, so really it's kind of event. This brings it to the measure of the event of the line. But I suppose I was thinking of like the, well, this is what with that Paracesi book, she brings up the random in relation to number, but it also seems to sort of relate more to this sort of non-linear aspect.
This is Luciana Parucci, yeah.
So it's quite interesting to think of like, well, I think she's claiming that the sort of computer sort of coding space, that you can somehow the indivisible, there's an indivisible aspect which relates to random or number in that sense. So which brings in kind of it sort of it seems to allow an infinite which isn't abstract.
Okay, let's not go there for time being then. Well, let's hold on to it because we don't have the book to refer to. Yeah?
Just one thing, I was sort of thrown off at the beginning because I thought of the line as very much a physical line and one. But from what we were saying now, the line, or better the linearity, has to do with certainty, which we were reading about here in the first chapter. So the certainty that between, in abstract subject and object, but in practice between myself and all of you, or what understanding what you're saying, or for you to understand me, we assume that or to know anything, we assume that there is a number of things that constitute a bridge that we can trust. And all those are linked in their proper way. That's the logic we use to understand, and that's the linearity.
When you say trust, what does that word
we
mean?
We mean that we are certain that the knowledge we are building or we are getting
is true.
Is true.
And by true, we mean that it's repeatable.
It's repeatable, it's predictable, but it's also not an hallucination. It's not a solipsistic thing where I could be dreaming of having physical feelings and
Okay, so it has an existence, and the existence, this is getting back what Mark was saying, is the noumena and the phenomena.
Yes, so the existence is out there, and I somehow accept that there's going to be the possibility of a number of translations between the out there and the inside here, whatever you want to call it. But I somehow trust that, then I therefore trust the space that holds it up and keeps it together.
Okay.
And the time that flows it through.
Yeah.
Thing of this problem, history. When digital came, when CD came in over the wax disc, people complained that there was something wrong with the sound. And what they did with the digital CD was they looked at the frequencies that were that you can hear, and they decided, well, you can't hear these higher frequencies, as our ears cannot hear these higher and lower frequencies, so we don't need them on the CD, so they cut them off, and they just put in the frequencies that you could hear. And this seemed to be what the problem was with people with better hearing than me were somehow hearing it. But remember we had like at Greenwich, Dick from Stein, which is
That sounds really bizarre. But what he means is that there was a person named Dick Rockin something. Anyway, he's the director of Stein.
And Stein is really
Studio for Electronic Instrumental Music.
Yeah.
They make instruments. They make up instruments.
Yeah, and I made a point where I had him with us saying, you know, tell us about the
Dick
wax
Ryken.
disc, and he said, yes, if you want the best recording quality, it's still something like a wax disc because it puts all the frequencies, but we don't need those things. So it's some now I'm stuck, but it's something like the sound needs all its frequencies to be able to present the frequencies that we hear in the way that we're not digital either. And this is a problem that I haven't thought about, and obviously it's not my area or territory, but this seems to be a part of the question that you asked about the linearity and stuff.
Actually, I thought about that before with the thing with the CDs and the sound and the digital sound. I don't know why. But I think the point, because people complain about the sound, is because you have to describe a wave with a number of points discrete. So the sound between one point and another is invented. It's not actually the sound, because you cannot register anything between 2 pounds digitally. So they just produce it through a formula.
So another way of putting this, okay, because we're getting quite warm here, both actually, I don't know about you guys, I think it's very warm in here, and some other way, but the linear is speaking about something that, let's say, connects with the linguistic, and the non-linear is not digital, that's still linear. It is in fact the acoustic, or what is often called the sonic, by which there's a problem there. So I don't want to over egg it at the moment. I just want to bring your attention to it. That as Mark has thrown out on the table, as it were, and Oscar as well, that there's a way of thinking that cannot be held in the so-called digital stroke analog scenarios, which for people who don't have a real sense of how the linearity operates, they think that those are two different logics. There's the digital logic and the analog logic, and they are slightly different, but they're in fact, if you think about where this point is sitting, and the waves, and so on and so forth, and so-called getting out of this, it's much more complex, because the linear speaks to universal totalities that are either closed totalities or open totalities. There's a whole different ways. There's the logic of the German, what is it called, the German logic school, I think. Anybody notice the German logic school? Oh, it's a very, the capitalist logic, that's what it's called. The capitalist logic school, which is a school that, you know, can you open that window without having that frame break? Thank you. Just be careful. That the capital logic school basically argues. No, I'm not going to get into capital logic. Well done. It's that 700-pound frame. Thank you. Okay. Any questions so far before we now open the book to find out what is going to be the Heideggerian,
But it's more one, or maybe it's a huge one.
Did you say it's a morbid one?
No, but it's more.
Oh, right.
Or maybe it's huge, but it can be absolutely probably yes or no. Why don't we say acoustic or sonic? To me, it's immediately in reference, I don't want to say in opposition to visual. And acoustic and sonic comes up in various instances. I don't know why. I think the first one is the distinction that is made about text and TV by McLuhan, for example. Which
text and TV, did you say?
When it defines TV as acoustic, because but anyway, my question is it taken as a metaphor?
Is what taken as a metaphor?
Using sonic and acoustic versus visual, because visual would refer to.
Well, it's taken as a metaphor about the same way that visual is taken as a metaphor.
Okay, but so it harkens back to the image of Plato that understands knowledge as seeing. or the classic image of
No, the visual tends to these days, I mean, yes and no, because the visual tends to talk about representation, which is a linguistic move. Whereas the so-called acoustic, to the degree to which we can even use this word, I mean, people are hunting for a way to talk about it. They don't necessarily mean acoustic. But because sound is so difficult to speak about analytically, except to say it's not X, it's not fitting into Y, that kind of thing. That's why one goes to use this sort of appellation to explain it as a sonic or as an acoustic, or what Derrida will call the orality, or the timbre we were doing last year. Okay, so what's happening in these, let's say the acoustic move, or the aural, A-U-R-A-L move, is that or to put it slightly differently, what's happening in the visual move is that this move toward representation, which brings on questions of language, cannot resolve the linearity problem. It can only describe the linearity problem. It can only describe what needs to be done to fix it, and it doesn't actually fix it, because even terms like digital or multiversal or so on and so forth, they're still connected to a linear notion. Okay, so that's part of the problem. Now, if you move into this acoustic thing, which is just a device to name this field that at the moment can't be held in the same way, because it has different characteristics that make it work. That field, some people, like this people, calls it fractal philosophy, the fractal world, but you don't have to go to fractal, because even that's a misuse of the word fractal, to be honest with you, but so you can call it acoustic philosophy, but then that tends to, everybody thinks of music, but it's not wrong to think of music or sound. Like, so for example, there was a guy, Mark, you might remember this guy, who wrote in the 1890s against Hegel. He was a musician. He was mad at Hegel because he was making the, I can't remember his name right now. Anyway, the book is about, he accuses Hegel of not understanding where music fits, and that because Hegel keeps saying that music is not art, and this guy whose name I've repressed and can't remember what it is, nor can I remember the name of the book, so that's perfect. Anyway, what? Kuhn.
Is it that one?
No, Kuhn wrote in the 1960s.
No, recent one, a recent book on noise.
Oh, Kahn.
Kahn,
Yeah, Douglas Kahn. Yeah, no, this guy wrote in the 1890s. George Heislick, I think it is. Henslick. That's it, Henslick. H-A-N-S-L-I-C-K, something like that. Henslick. George, G-E-O-R-G. And it's called something like The Something of Music. What it's called. That's incredible. Anyway, whatever it's called. The point is that you can find it when you look it up. But the point is that in this argument, he basically says, first of all, music is art. The problem is it's not art if you use Hegel's argument. Because art, according to Hegel, represents, and music can never represent. And so, therefore, by circular reasoning, music can't represent, therefore music isn't art. So art represents, music can't represent, so therefore music is not art. So George Hanslick says that's just ridiculous. That in fact one has to understand that art is actually about this asymmetry, by which he doesn't mean linear asymmetries like askew parallel lines, but that he means there's something completely different going on. Now enter in all the characters that are obsessed with the word difference, and you're getting somewhere to get a sense of the hunt for the for the I don't know what, the Holy Grail, or the unholy Grail, or whatever it is, the thing that's the asymmetry moment. And that is what is the groundless ground. Okay, so it took us not too long, an hour and a half. It's not too bad. Hour and 20 minutes. So to back up here. When we talk about, when we, meaning we being Heidegger and Wittgenstein, in all of our incarnations. It's talking about the groundless ground. It is dealing with a way of situating meaning outside of a chronology or a linearity that does not get rid of time, does not get rid of space. It just deals with it completely differently. That's what's on the table. And I was thinking the last couple of weeks we were going over this, that this just was not clear. Now, hopefully it's clear, but I think that what we need, but it's still not clear enough, because I know that it took us a while to get here. Keep going back and thinking about this line business. You know, maybe we can get John Sutcliffe, because this is his work, to give us lots of these, and so we can, so, you know, we can have all these, so you can play around with lines, see what you're going to do with these things. Dane, make him face. No?
John, can I quickly go back to Hanslick?
Yeah.
Because I think Hanslick was talking at that time, and there was a conversation going on around that time between people like Wagner and Nietzsche about program music and non-chromatic music, where non-program
and tragedy and
and Nietzsche, who was with the Wagner, and I think maybe the kind of representational idea of music, program music, got themes, but then Nietzsche comes to the idea with non-programmatic music that the important thing is the will, the saying yay or nay to the music, and nothing to do with emotion or anything like that, which he thought was so socially constructive, emotion in music, that it was irrelevant to the music in
Hanslick saying this.
No, Nietzsche,
right.
For this kind of non-representational, non-programmatic, anti-Wagnerian stance that, and that's the yay or nay, which then gets taken up with people like Deleuze.
Well, so what for Nietzsche, anybody can answer this, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but what for Nietzsche then is the birth of tragedy? I mean, Roshi has a title of a book called The Birth of Tragedy. What is the birth of tragedy? What is being birthed in the tragedy he's speaking of?
The rationalization of understanding.
Right, so the tragedy for Nietzsche is...
It's
over to Kate. The tragedy is... Kate?
I've been thinking about the birth of tragedy and I haven't read it, but I keep tripping up on it.
Okay, it's going to be hard to answer this question then, but that doesn't start...
It's not the birth of rationality per se, it's the splitting of rationality from the so-called emotional...
The senses.
Senses, it's the sensual side.
Right, so the birth of tragedy for Nietzsche is...
The linearity.
It's a linearity which brings on representation, the visual, you know, a sense of nihilism that's not about the nihilism that Kierkegaard is talking about, the ex nihilo move of the secret. It's not that form of the nihilism. It's the nihilism of thinking anything goes or nothing matters. One of those two forms of nihilism.
That's the infinite regressive interpretation. Is that when you say anything goes?
Yes, that's the infinite regressive interpretation. Yes. But it's not the eternal return. That's not what you're meaning. Yeah,
no.
right. No. Okay.
But then a line of linearity is actually an organization of things, because linearity does not do away with the sensual. It just places it in a very specific position in reference to language and rationality.
Okay. But why did Wittgenstein, can you harken back to either chapter 1 or in fact if you actually read it, the Tractatus, why does Wittgenstein think that Tractatus is just crap? What's his problem with it?
Because what comes across in the Weber book here is I always took it not differently, but I never saw it in this light by reading Wittgenstein directly. Is that what Wittgenstein can do in the Tractatus, and in a certain way that does well, is to give certainty to the line that links a noun to the object the noun refers to.
Mm-hmm.
And that works, but then there is plenty more, even just inside language.
Mm-hmm.
Even just inside a language that is not poetic or is not colloquial, even inside scientific or formal language, there is more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And that does not have a direct object, or does not, or does not always have a direct object in some other instances, or simply its object is, by the very definition of language gives to it, changing like time. So there are several paradoxes about naming time. The
Mm-hmm.
classic St. Augustine one is that the past is gone, the future is not yet here, the present is fleeting, time doesn't exist. Well, it's a provocation, obviously, but at the
Right,
same
yeah.
time, if you have to stick to language, that's what you get to.
And so there's always this thing called the in-between.
as well. So what the problem that Wittgenstein finds is that there has been the projection of one image, the linearity between the name, the sound pen, the name pen and the pen, to work for everything else.
Who says that?
No, the problem that Wittgenstein finds
Oh, right.
with the Tractatus is that if that logic has to hold, then everything has to respond to this very static distribution of bits. While some and plenty of instances do not respond to such a static model. In other works, it goes about the difference between hype and mound, when
Mhm.
a hype ends and when a mound begins. Or how to define colors, so it's always very interesting.
Yeah,
because
red and the ish.
the red and the blue and the ish, because certainly something is red when everybody agrees that's red, but then there are nuances to the margins of it, which might be red to some or not to others, under some light or not under other lights, or simply, even if you want to measure them, there is enough yellowiness that it's not red 100%. Red is, so it tapers off, and so the problem he finds again is that the one model that works locally has been erected as a universal model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so very good, but it was a sort of bit of around the barn there,
Mhm.
which is okay. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, why is set theory something that is being attacked by Wittgenstein?
It's to do with the fact that everything is already there. Is that
Right.
very simple?
Right, and so that's what the linearity implies. And so the only way to deal with new things is to say that they're either against the linearity or they're in between the linearity. Neither of which, according to both Wittgenstein and Heidegger, is an accurate way of understanding how something new can emerge. So, in other words, like let's talk about the gay movement. We'll just use that as an example. For a very long time, in fact, it's still probably going on. There was the argument that being gay was against being straight. So you were either straight or you were gay. The concept of either being gay, which had nothing to do with being straight, was a very tough one for people to get a handle on, and that included gay people. So the way in which one begins to understand an alternative identity, let's say, I'm just using this as an example, as not being against something, but actually being for something, whatever that is, what is not able to be understood under, in this case, identity politics, which creates this unity argument. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah.
Yes. Making sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good. Okay. Same thing with female. To be female is not to be male. To be male is not to be female. These were the very specific, and this is like, and therefore, if you found yourself being kind of male-ish or kind of female-ish, you were so-called in between. But there is no in between. So what Wittgenstein would first make an argument about was that presents itself as an excluded middle. Are you leaving us again? Pick up your children.
My husband went to the conference. No ways.
See it. So the idea that that the man-ish, the female-ish, the ish thing, to try and understand it as an in-between, was to give it already an existence that was not necessarily correct. In fact, it wasn't correct. In fact, it just didn't make any sense to talk about it. So the groundless ground move is around this thing that is trying to get out of this linearity, which takes many forms. The most sophisticated version of it could be called metaphysics. So a lot of things can be filtered into that name. Now, I'm thinking that on the one hand, there's different types of, let's say, physics. Quantum physics, Euclidean physics, Newtonian physics, so on and so forth. And nobody's challenging the word physics. And I think to the degree to which metaphysics is analogous to that, so we're talking about ways of thinking, yes. So I'm not talking about that version of metaphysics. I'm talking about the version of metaphysics that is dealing with dialectical moves, that's dealing with the notion of pragmatism, and is dealing with the notion of set theory. That form of, that is to say, what usually passes as either digital theory, structuralism, some forms of psychoanalysis, linguistic theory. These are all the things that bring in a linearity by accident, or don't realize, or whatever the right way of putting that is. And what they're trying to do here, in both cases, and that's why he's finding them very similar, even though they're coming from totally different paths. Their groundless ground is specifically around this asymmetry thing. But asymmetry meaning totally different way of understanding. So the great thing about Duchamp is that he brings in the question of the eye. He brings in the question of a certain way of seeing, which broke the sort of traditional canon of art and what was considered to be art. But in so doing, he also, or what happened, is that the notion of seeing became the way to express contemporary art as visual art. This big thing called visual art. So, and that's still the case today. We still call it visual art. We don't call it acoustic art. It's called, when we say visual art, we don't necessarily mean that we're talking about things that you see, because it's been so much part of the vernacular that it's all, anything, almost anything can be considered visual art. Performance, theater, a photograph. You say beer?
Video art.
Oh, video, yeah, video art.
Video, I don't know. Maybe
Video.
we can try.
That's right. Almost anything could be considered visual art. But if you said it as acoustic art, you immediately start thinking about sound. Basically, you wouldn't really think I'm talking about the visual. So the question is, what these guys are trying to develop is, they're not saying there is an answer to this question. Is it possible? Is it worthwhile even to think differently about how something has a meaning established that gets away from the symmetry? So it gets away from certainty, probability, and goes toward uncertainty, but this uncertainty is a predictable uncertainty, which is very complicated to get, because it's an uncertainty. Are you leaving now?
No, I'm just cold.
You're now cold. Okay.
No, it's all right. I'll do this.
Okay. You shut the window.
No, it's
Okay. No point in having you cold. Just make sure that thing doesn't fall. Probably should move that. Anyway, go on.
The term uncertainty keeps returning in various moments in the seminar. Earlier we mentioned glitch. These are all negative connotations
Why?
in the language itself.
Oh, I see, right, yeah.
Uncertainty, the glitch. And although we are not intending them as negative, somehow it seems that even the dimension of the language we're using does not allow us to name them in any different way.
Well, that's not true. I mean, like fractal, for example,
Is
a form
picking
of-
up a question, yeah.
is a form of uncertainty,
Okay.
but it's a very specific form that is named in, let's say, a non-negative way. Was that a sneeze? Or is that someone getting hurt? Everything okay? I'm serious, is that,
Yeah.
do you
No,
mind?
It's just bad.
It's just bad.
It's
It's just bad.
bad. I
You know that scream, do you?
I know sneeze.
Oh, it's a sneeze. Okay. Fine.
Wow.
Just let that one just
Sneeze
away.
is a drama.
It's very good, though. It's an excellent sneeze.
So in other words, it is possible to speak or to think this that is not linear, it's not deterministic in a sense, without having to be postmodern, uncertain, or always, because otherwise we are just building a dualism in a different way.
Well, let's do it slightly differently. Let's go back to Descartes and the question of doubt. All right, famous question of doubt. For Descartes, as I've said many, many times, and as the Cartesian move is often misunderstood, doubt does not mean confused or don't agree. It's one of those negative positive words that actually, or positive negative words or something like that, that actually means a limit that can't be fully formed, let's say. So the example that that Kierkegaard gives, I think it's Kierkegaard, anyway, I gave it in the Kierkegaard lectures the other day, is that with doubting Thomas, that's the type of doubt that's seen as a negative doubt, as it were. You know, that's a negative thing. I don't believe what you're saying. Are you really Jesus? You know, did you really die? And he puts his hands into the wound, which I think is just fantastic, to see if he's going to go ow, or if he's real, or I don't know if blood comes out or something. You know, it's like, and then when he puts his hand in, for some reason, this seems to say to Thomas, oh wow, you are real, or something like that, right? So doubting Thomas is no longer doubting, but the fact that he was doubting is always held against him, okay, for the rest of humanity and life. That's not the doubt that Descartes is talking about. He's talking about the way in which, as I've said before, you can doubt everything, but you can't doubt doubt. Doubt becomes the edge after which you cannot go. Not because you don't want to go, not because there's no intention to go, but there's no going out of it. Another way of putting it in terms of mathematics or physics is that you can't get outside of the universe. The universe can expand, but it's as far out as the edge of that thing goes. There's nothing beyond the universe. It's not like if you put a screensaver on your computer and you say make it fit the screen, or you know, and it makes it stretch, or then you say no, it's ruined the image, I'm going to make it like this, and so there's blue showing on the other side. That is not the edge of the universe. The edge of the universe doesn't work like that. The edge of the universe is the doubt. It's this or as Mandelbrot would say, it's like the coastline. It's not a straight line. It's made up of fractals. It doesn't have the same properties. So these so-called negative words, uncertainty in mathematics is not as negative as it sounds. It's following a very similar thing to the doubt question. Is that making sense?
Yes. No, it does make sense. I was thinking that for some reason I keep hitting the impression, and I use impression very carefully, that something like the edge of the universe is almost a nonsense, because rather than arriving at the end and feeling that the line of my path should have or could have continued but doesn't, I don't even see that the universe is ended, because my line is what it is.
That's right.
So it's a dimension that I'm dealing with.
Yes, because it's not about a line.
Hmm.
Very good. It's about dimension. Speed.
You can think about the universe is infinite at the smaller level, not just at the big.
What do you mean it's infinite, smaller word?
Because when we think about infinite, we always think about the space and
Yeah, and planets.
travel and
That's
planets
right,
and
yeah.
go to the edge
The
of
black
the
hole.
universe. But you cannot go smaller and smaller and smaller in an infinite way. I don't know if you know what I mean. Maybe there is, like I always remember the movie Black and this movie of Will Smith. I don't remember. The
Will
movie
Smith.
sucks. Men in Black.
Oh, Men in Black.
The movie.
Does it suck? That's a fantastic film.
It's good. But at the end of the movie, there is like a play with monsters and crystal balls, and then everything go into a crystal ball. There is universe and galaxies, and outside as well. So I think the limit is a corporeal limit, a physical limit. It could be to the biggest scale or to the minimum scale. It's not like an age only in one direction.
Getting somewhere. Okay, good. Can we open the book now? Or do you have more questions? No?
It's quite
Okay.
good on
Sorry.
this page, unless you have
It's quite good on which
190.
page is that?
180.
Don't open it yet. Mark had a
I
question.
just wonder if this is relevant to the case at all. The word cleave,
Mhm.
you know this word?
Mhm.
You know what it means? Cleave.
To cleave as in.
Well, it doesn't, does it? Because it means when you cleave your tongue to your mouth, it means to stick to the top of the mouth. Cleave, it sticks. But at the same time, as you say, it means to come
Cut,
apart.
there you go.
It's from an Anglo. I don't pretend I can speak Anglo-Saxon. It's from Anglo-Saxon. But there was two words. They had already had a word for splitting apart, and they also had a word for putting together. But they combined these two words into this other word, cleave, which means, as we said, stick together, come apart. I wonder if it's like when they were trying to cleave a piece of wood or a stone, it's only when they tried to break it apart they got it stuck together. And that made me think of Deleuze, but I think it's Plato, where he says about Alice in Wonderland, the bigger I get, the smaller I get.
Mhm.
Where this is kind of the thing on the table. This is the kind of thing, understanding, or is this relevant to what it is you're trying to get at in this kind of understanding?
It isn't irrelevant, but what I was trying to get at is the fact that in order to understand edges, one has to get rid of linearity altogether. One has to think, well, unless it's like a frame, and that's going to put us back into representational thinking. So if one's going to, let's start again.
So it's the linearity and cleaving.
Yeah. So a different way of putting this is that it's not possible to think without making some kind of division, some kind of a marker. One needs to have some kind of an edge in order to think. This is where this is coming from. How does one think the edge? Is the edge in between, or is the edge at the edge? And
Stuck together or apart.
stuck together or apart? Is the edge solid, or is the edge a bunch of points? If it's a bunch of points, can you go through that edge? If you can go through that edge, what good is your thought? Yeah.
Doesn't Heidegger talk about being and beings circling each other so that one arrives in and one goes around the other?
Yes.
So that's quite a useful edge
Mhm.
concept, I think.
Yes. As long as we understand, and that's what the whole question of curved time is about too. It's the same kind of process. It's pulled in this direction. It's pulled by an attraction. And the attraction, so time in that context is actually speed and distance that's being batted down as it tries to go this way. It's being done like so because of the gravity. So the same thing with being and being, yeah. But being and being, there's, which we'll get into later, but somehow they're meant to stay apart. Because if they didn't, then they would be, they're both here and they can't get any closer. Or they can, because if they got so close, they would become one and therefore they would be meaningless. So meaning has to have some kind of distance, cut of some kind. The question is, how does one think the cut? Is it an anti? Is it a line? Because the cut is what becomes the groundless ground. The cut is the doubt. The cut is this edge, this fractal, this coastline that you can't think it in this linear way. Well, you can think it in a linear way, but that's going to bring on very specific interpretations of how to go forward. So it's going to, so again, the line isn't the solid thing that's a point that then you have to stretch out, or a bunch of little points, it could be a bunch of little points. Let's say it's all of those things, so you think, okay, if it's not really technically connected, there's like little spaces in between that make up this thing called the line, pardon me, then it still feels like there's like movement, there's like some flexibility. No, the line is still not allowing a porosity to happen. Instead, what's happening, it's creating a false friend, as it were. It's creating this thing called no man's land, the excluded middle, the in-between, this kind of thing, which analytically is simply reinventing this line.
Is the line Dasein?
No, the line, don't even think about the line. The line, in Heidegger, it's a groundless ground. It's not a line, it's a fractal, or it's a surface, it's a coastline, it's something very different. It's a marker, because to think is requiring a marker. So I go back to the gay scenario, or go back to being female. Being female is not anti-male. It's not division like that. That doesn't mean that there's not an identity called female that one can actually say, but it doesn't mean that it's against, that there's a totality of understanding of what it is to be human, and and you divide it in half, and the half is female, and the other half is male, that kind of thing. Because then when you get with transgendered or any of this other stuff, they're so-called in-between, which is like not the case. So the problem is, how does one begin to assert identities without reinserting linearity and this binary? So how can one think meaning without a binary? If you need a cut of some kind to think, then how do you do it without bringing back the binary? And so, answer, you have to think it with a groundless ground. But then I want to make sure everybody understands what the bloody groundless ground is, because otherwise, it's not going to make any sense. You're going to. You have no idea how upset I would have been had that broken. I don't know. Leave it. It's fine.
You can put up the constants.
No, it's all right. Just, it's okay. It's fine now. All is good.
Yeah.
That's all right. Don't worry. Okay.
I think, Kate, do you know what Ben Jonson played? Have you seen? It's called like The Woolish Land, which explores this back in that time when both you were in arrested for wearing trousers, that kind of thing.
Last year. Last year in like certain countries anyway.
Yeah. That's well,
I was sent home once for wearing trousers from the school I taught him.
For a school you taught in?
Bloody. No.
Wow.
Put on the skirt.
yes,
Gosh.
Yes. Right, so it's worth looking at. I think.
So let us open the page to 180. Did you say?
Yeah, I thought that this is.
What page?
180. Oh, do you have your? Oh, you have a bigger thing now.
I found
Excellent.
it was under my bed.
Well
I
done.
don't understand.
Before we do this, Andre, I'm going to call on you to explain how to read, how to have the iPad read to you.
Oh, no.
Okay. Sorry. I was so excited about this because in the MA class, what turned out to be the case, I had misread the horror of last week's lecture, which I told you about. In fact, it wasn't considered a horrible lecture. Of course, they are also my students, and therefore they're not going to say when confronted, do you think I gave a horrible lecture? No, never. None of us thought. Anyway, but really what the problem was, or anyway the problem that they professed to say was the problem, was that people felt bad about reading because the words often are very difficult to say. So Andre showed me how the iPad can read to you. Okay, it does sound a little bit weird. So while you're reading, it can read to you so you can hear it, because I think hearing the words, that's why I like to do the reading out loud. I think that it helps you pedagogically. So why don't you show them how this works?
Well, somewhere in settings, I think you need to do something, but I've got it set up so you punch the home button 3 times.
In fast succession, you punch it 3 times in fast, and then what happens?
So it switches on the voice over.
iBooks. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, The Science of Logic. The purpose of the Cambridge Hegel translation system of translations of the best German edition.
That was pretty much the response yesterday, wasn't it?
Can you make it a little louder? That's possible.
Together with philosophical introductions
Philosophical.
of operators. This new translation of The Science of Logic by G. W. F.
This is is what happened with the digital systems. You cannot put together.
Google Translate
Why
the
not
same
take
thing.
It sounds like movie for others.
It's so great.
Starring.
G W.
So I just think that it's really helpful that if you can get a hold of an iPad or Siri or whatever it is that does this, that is worth the price of admission. Okay.
It's John Wayne.
Starring John Wayne. Starring G.W.F. Angle. It's great. Okay.
I did Google Translate has the same thing. If you want to know, if you want to translate something, it reads back to you, even when you write a mistake. But I did a story of an eye, one of the parts about the eye being in the the last part of the eye is in the vagina and all that. The most creepy part. I put it in the Google Translate, and the guy with that voice read that back to me. And I was like, hey.
That is
That
fantastic.
makes it dry.
That's just so funny. But it is kind of helpful in its own sort of mad little way. Because you can be, obviously, quietly in the bathroom, reading, and having this thing read to you while you're reading it, and it will stick a little bit better. That's why we read out loud, because it does help the sticking process. You want to try reading the passage in the same way? 181. Okay, no, wait. Okay, so you're on page 180, right?
Yeah, it's the bit which, it's the bit which starts, which time often invokes, but if you want the beginning of the paragraph, it takes a while.
Okay, good. Why don't you read it aloud?
While we can make perfectly good sense of ordinary comparisons between assertions and things asserted, this can only take place within a game which itself isn't the kind of thing that is capable of disagreement with reality. Wittgenstein often invokes the difference between deciding upon a unit of measurement and taking measurements with this unit, or that between the rules of a game and moves made within it.
Okay, stop for 1 second. See where it says dis-stroke agreement? Why is it written like that, do you think? Or do you think they're just being odd? Why is it dis-stroke agreement?
It's
What's being implied by writing it like that?
well, it could be either. So
That's right, yeah. So it's looking at the dis in relationship to agreement. Okay, just want to mention that. Okay. So he often invokes the difference between deciding upon, go on.
Deciding upon a unit of measurement and taking measurements with this unit, or that between the rules of a game and moves made within it. The categories of right and wrong only apply within a system of measurement or game, and not to the system or game itself. A chess move can be illegitimate, but it makes no sense to say that chess itself is wrong. We can draw the distinction between hypothesis and grammatical rule by means of the words true and false on the one hand, and practical and impractical on the other. A rule is not true or false. I will call this argument that we can not judge the rules of a game or the framework of a discussion by criteria applicable within it, the framework argument.
Okay, so how come you chose this? I mean, you're right to have chosen it. What?
Well, I was reading that this morning, it just seemed to connect with what we were saying in terms of this difference between kind of the working within the representation of measurement or kind of getting into this other way of like dimensionality. So like the game, the moves of the game. So that he basically is like making the contrast between the two things in this paragraph.
Okay.
But I suppose also because I thought it was interesting to bring in this question, right and wrong, because this is what with this scenario, this outcome of like the question of right and wrong, true and false, what's at stake. We're not throwing out truth with this while we're rejecting conceptual framework. We're not actually throwing out truth, but what truth is becoming sort of slightly different in terms of how we look at it.
Okay, so a rule, and where he says a rule is not true or false, could you say that that word rule is the limit, is exchangeable for the word limit there?
Yeah.
I think the rule is a system,
The rule is a system.
and the limit is the framework. isn't it?
No. Limit can be a system. That's the point. So if a limit can be a system, when is the limit a linear system? And when is the limit a so-called non-linear system? Or to put it slightly differently, when is the limit a linear system, and when is the limit a groundless ground system? So what, yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
So let me say it again, a different way.
If the edge limit
Yeah.
down, all
Yeah.
we set up. It's set up because we need it for thinking.
Right,
So to actually make an argument, make a point, we need an edge, and we created that edge on that point.
right,
And then true and false operates because of that edge,
right,
and that's then it's groundless ground edge.
that's right.
Yeah, because we make it true, we make it false, and
So what, when
because
you
it
say we
operates
make it true,
well,
like,
because it operates in the framework that there is edge.
so if no one's making it happen, does it not happen, does it,
I think
does it require an intentionality to make something happen?
No, I think no, I think
just
it
happen.
happens. Yeah,
Okay.
it just happens. But if we were looking at the linear,
Yeah,
then the truth would be on one side, and
the false would be in.
our false would be on the other side of the framework, and
Good.
that would not be good.
That would be bad.
Because then you don't have both in the argument, would you? If you argue.
Well, I mean, in dialectics, that is precisely the power, the beauty of dialectics, is that you have both at the same time.
Oh yes.
But it's not the rule. Is that
What, with
in
dialectics?
yeah.
Well, then it's
No.
Interpenetration of opposites.
What?
Interpenetration of opposites.
I love the things that you say. The last one was the phallic mother, right? That was all good.
Eternal fallacy.
That was it, yeah. No. Let me just do it very quickly. So we're all on the same page, as it were, that are good. So, can you all see it, or do you want me to put it up there? Is it easier to see on the table, or is it easier to see it on the wall? Okay, so, we know the famous thing, all that there is and all that there's not make up the whole problem. That's the universal thing. All that there is on this side, the green side, and all that there's not, and it's a point-for-point relationship. So it's not like this side runs to catch up with that side, right? You know, they're not like, one side's not like running when you do this, and they kind of end up at the same time. So they're literally on both sides. Now, let's call this side thing, and this side not thing, or nothing. And so the not thing and the thing taken together add up to what?
The whole.
To unity.
To zero, to unity. Zero and unity is the whole thing. But of course this is a tautology, because this is not that and that is not this. So in order for this to actually make some form of meaning, in the very simplistically put dialectic thing, I know, Marcus is always saying, that's the wrong way to do it. Anyway, if you start with the not side, so the no thing, okay, on the other side, that side, is thing or thesis. Oops. Okay, so thesis. So this is antithesis on this side, or antithesis, anyway, or no thing. And when you're saying penetrated, it's not the penetration as such, it's what's called sublating. So this gets sublated, thesis gets sublated into nothing, or the other way around, depending on the whatever, but that's a longer story. And that together is synthesized and the synthesis comes back around and forms the ground to both of these sides. So to put it slightly differently, you could say thesis is bourgeoisie, antithesis is proletariat. Taken together makes the capitalist mode of production. The capitalist mode of production forms the ground around which these two sides make sense, because proletariat and bourgeoisie don't make sense in opposition to each other just by themselves as a tautology. You could go, and that just says the other side. It only makes sense when you understand that the synthesis, something happens in the synthesis that creates, in this case, mode of production. The mode of production then gives meaning to these two sides, and therefore you start getting some meat on the bones of what the thesis might mean, or the antithesis, or the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's a very easy, straightforward, and useful way of thinking about this until you actually read the stuff, and you can see how much more complicated it is. But the bottom line here is that this famous thing of coming back around and forming the ground, this is often understood as excess, or not fitting in, or becoming, transcendence. All of these things are part of this move which keeps everything within the whole, keeps everything in, and so this is how you get a universal. So a universal concept, a universal and a universal concept is the same word. A universal is a concept. If it hasn't been sublated, if it's not part of this unity, then it's simply an abstraction. So before these get sublated, they're just abstractions. So theory itself, I can't write backwards or sit down, abstraction. So an abstraction is that which hasn't gone through this process of sublation, synthesis, ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's the universal.
That's the universal
mode.
That's the universal mode. I mean, there's many different versions of how this works. I mean, Marx would argue that, the ground here, what comes around here is history, and history gives meaning to these two sides. Hegel will argue what comes around here is knowledge, and knowledge gives meaning to these two sides. But it's quite a long process, as it were. But in so-called coming back around, it's not like it runs outside of the thing and comes back around, and it's like musical chairs and grabs a chair and says, here's the ground. There's no literally moving back around, just like these points don't run and catch up with each other on either side. So I try to liken it to like the rings of a tree, if it helps you visually to think this, so that you can't really pull out the ring. So this is not really outside of the unity. It's just, the tree is as wide as it gets. The tree is not bigger than that. This is a slice of the tree that way.
This is to assert the system rather than the groundless system.
This is to assert the system rather than the groundless system. Although there are ways in which using this system, because for so long, particularly in the Frankfurt School, the argument was that what was wrong with the Marx version is that it didn't have anything around sensuality, sexuality, and so on. It didn't have a way of incorporating Freud, Lacan, whatever, the questions of identity, the things that things were too orthodox Marxist. I mean, you'd have like these really solid classes. You couldn't answer questions like, well, how come if this is supposed to work? How come it hasn't? Why did the workers support fascism, or whatever? I mean, whatever the basic sort of problems were with the solution of how this didn't quite pan out. And so some people would argue that the real problem with the picture was that in fact it should be kind of like this, so that the so-called groundless ground in this model of universal becomes the becoming, or the transcendental, or not transcendental, the transcendence. So that, and there, because that is basically surface, it was seen as being negative dialectic, some form of the knot moving. That Derrida is going to be talking about this as the trace, as this kind of quasi-messianism. This whole movement is still within the unified, the universal. Now Derrida does try to break this. I mean, I'm lumping him in because I'm annoyed with him on other issues, but it's not quite accurate to say that. But anyway, the point is that this thing then, because it's a movable feast, well, they're all movable feasts in a certain sense, this creates meaning. Like Adorno is very clear about how the negative dialectic, or how, rather, that the object always exceeds its meaning. No, the other way around. The meaning always exceeds the object. So the object is not, the sum is always greater than the whole of its parts. There we go. So you add the parts, you get something like, if you add, it's bigger than the sum. So the question is, how does that become, how does identity get formed? It gets formed in this sort of thing that would be considered excess or lack, depending on where you're coming from, any of this kind of thing. And this is often considered the groundless ground. That is not what they're saying is the groundless ground in this book. This groundless ground is a groundless ground that's based on rejecting linearity in all of its forms, by which they mean the universal, how the universal is progressing. Yes.
So in this paragraph you just read, the rule is not true or false. When we stop.
Oh, sorry.
Just referring to that.
Sorry.
You have it like this, after turning it 90 degrees, and we're talking about this movement here.
Yeah.
The rule is not true or false. I would call this argument that we cannot judge the rule of a game or the framework of a discussion by criteria applicable within it, the framework argument.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is Wittgenstein is still criticizing a way of thinking that is linear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is this the framework
Argument.
framework
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the system of, like, so when you said, so I said the rule was the system, but the rule was the limit, but the system of the game is
the
limit
rule.
too.
It's the system of the game is the rule. So
Yeah.
see how that?
Yeah, it's like you can change games for different ways of accessing somewhere else. So rather than just always playing chess, or like there only being one system, and that's chess. That's the only way of finding out anything. So there's like
No. It's like in chess there are certain specific rules that apply to the overall rule called chess.
yes.
Okay, those specific rules that apply to the overall rule called chess work because there's a certain way in which the game has been devised, has enlarged, and so on and so forth. So if you, quote, break those rules or don't follow those rules, you're not playing chess. Of course, as you know, for those of you that actually play chess, that in the 1400s they came up with a new rule because chess was too easy to play, and that was the en passant rule. And that was the way in which the pawn could take a king, by doing a very odd little dance. And now they just added that rule as part of the game. That became, nobody decided, oh, there's two types of chess now. There's the chess that has the en passant game and rule, and there's the chess that doesn't have it. No, now chess includes en passant as a move. Okay, so now the same thing with this. Sometimes you have the argument that, well, you're not playing the same game, so we're going to have two different games called the same game. Like, for example, Tea Party and the arguing about what is democracy, and then the rest of the world arguing about what is democracy, and they're both claiming truth claims about this thing called democracy, and so they want to have equal balance. They're saying there's two sides, or whatever, 7 sides, to the argument of it. Whereas what they're saying here is that there's a system, there's an actual system, that when the rule of the game is changed, either the game changes, or the game is able to take in that change. And it just becomes a bigger game, or a different game, or a wider game, but it's the same chess game. So in either case, that's part of the famous framework argument, which they are not talking about, which the groundless ground people are trying to get rid of. Because the framework argument is the argument around representation, representing in a kind of framed environment. So Heidegger, for example, will talk about this enframing, but the enframing isn't to create a frame, it's to create the kind of edges that are the doubt form of edges, the gay form of edges, I would call. In fact, in fact, did I send my article, my etchy homosexual article to you guys? Oh, I will do that. So I'm going to give that as my inaugural on the 20th of November, I think it is, which you all invite us after the class. I'm going to shut this window now, I'm freezing. Sorry. I see, see everybody's freezing. Yeah. Is falling. Okay. Clear as mud. Or are we getting, I think we're making some headway here. I feel that we are. So, what, yeah.
Maybe thought. Thesis as a kind of mean positional in its original.
Right.
Antithesis will then be out of position.
No, no. Always remember that the antithesis or the antithesis is always a contradiction. Therefore, it's a point-for-point relation. So it is out of it, but it's not like I am me and you are all not me. That wouldn't be thesis antithesis. That would be a different way of organizing it. Thesis antithesis is relying on contradiction, which is annihilation. So everything that I am, the other position, whatever that is not.
Either good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say it's X,
the hero
not,
and the anti-hero.
Yeah, it's X or not X.
I was just thinking about the actual words rather than maybe dialectic here.
Okay.
In position and out of position, maybe like something in motion. You say it's here, it's in fact it's not here. It's in out position.
Yeah, you're right about that. What I'm just trying to be clear about is when you're thinking in a dialectical way of posing it.
I'm actually just thinking about the word.
Okay, but I don't understand what that means.
Well, thesis has as in its meaning, one of its meanings is roots. It's Greek, isn't it?
No, thesis is it's like Stellen in German, since we learned that order. It's something that it's got the meaning of positing and standing. Is firm, is static, is something that...
And antithesis would be the non-firm.
Yes.
Put together, you have the firm, non-firm in the same thing.
Yes,
yeah,
but yeah, exactly right.
Which is a wobble. I was thinking about just looking at that and thinking about the Dasein,
Yeah.
meaning the da, meaning the positional part, meaning in German, here and there. Again,
Yeah.
doesn't translate well. They tell us
The there and so on, yeah.
it's like doing this, and then the being part being an infinitive about land or no, I don't know. I was just wondering whether there's anything going on in the movement there.
There is, and this is, let me try and put it slightly differently, and maybe say something completely different then. In a dialectical move, this is why it's so crucial to understand that linearity has a thickness. I'm going to put it like that, just so you can visually understand it. So, if I say to you that there is a contradiction, X, and for every point of X is the not X, for every point of the universe is the not universe, it doesn't mean that the universe, the not universe, expands ever outward. It means that the not universe is attached to the universe, only opposite, only inversely. So, like a photograph would be, it'd have this negative side, that kind of thing. So, the negative in a dialectical thinking, what's very important, or the not in a dialectical thinking, what's crucial about it is it allows for one to understand how a linear logic can have movement in it, so that it's not the static yes, no, go this way, that way, go that way, this, if yes, go this way, if no, go that way. It's much more sophisticated than that. It's saying that that change happens in a linearity. And that's the key here, because what the problem is that a lot of people are thinking that change only happens now if you think non-linear. No, change absolutely happens in a telos, with the goal becoming the ground and giving purpose to your moves. There's different ways of accounting for change. That, let's say, the very simple teleological way is to then suggest that it's a kind of a path that is continuous, whereas this is a continuous path, but the continuous path has openings precisely because you can think the not and the something at the same time. So they're literally stuck together for life. They can't be. It's not like the nothing is sitting outside of the something, like that. It's that the nothing is here. And then to make it even more sophisticated, it has the excess, which is the surface of the nothing, the surface of both of these two taken together. That surface is considered either excessive or not excessive, but it is the expression of these two sides taken together. And that's where a number of other, Lacan being one of them, takes refuge, as it were, or takes solace in the fact that you can find meaning in the lack or meaning in the excess, because the excess is the surface of these not and something, but it's still a universal requirement that's involved. Whereas what these guys are saying is they're trying to get completely away from this, and the question is, can you get completely away from this? Or maybe I shouldn't raise this question, but I'm going to raise it anyway. Can you get completely away from this and not get away from sexualities and not get away from the sensuous? Because part of the key, part of the thing that's so important about, let's say, the Frankfurt School, and I would think maybe Foucault up to a certain point, is that they are willing and able to talk about the political via locating something to do with sexuality and the senses and this, that doesn't fit in, all these kind of things. Whereas often when you have a kind of analytic, it's done in such a way that it gets rid of the first thing that's hard to find, which are the senses. So what these guys are trying to do is talk about this thing called a groundless ground, which requires, let's say, an acoustic way of understanding this groundless ground. And I think anybody that's dealt with civil rights issues gets this groundless ground thing. It's almost as a way of handling it. If it, like this is what I was saying about the sort of the gay movement, for those of you that have been involved in gay politics, that version, or some forms of feminist politics, where it's not pitted against being heterosexual, it's pitted against whatever. It's actually pitted for something that is not, in fact, the negative of something. It's not an anti. It's an ana. It's a A-N-A. It's an A. It's a distance. It's a different form of difference. It's a difference that's based on singularities, as we'll finally get to it, as opposed to a difference that's based on this kind of multiplicity of the linear. So another way of putting this, which maybe doesn't make any more sense than what I've been saying so far, there's two different ways of understanding plurality, the one and the many. The one and the many in kind of classical logic means you got one, and then you got lots of ones. So you got the one, the singular one, and then you got lots of those things put together. That's called the many, or that's the plural. Whereas in what they're talking about here, the one, I really feel like I'm talking about the Matrix. We must find the one. He's the one. The one is in fact infinite. And the many names the segments that taken together form, sort of elements.
You say the one names the infinite.
The one names the zero.
Would that in this thing of the design, the design is the infinite am? Is that?
Is the infinite?
It's not is. It's that not the infinite. It's not is. It's not that. And Heidegger talks about the design. It's not predicate, but he's talking about I am, not so much the I, but the one is the mensch. It's doesn't work either.
No.
It's just that. I mean, the Mensch does mean man, and he does mean.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's that movement of, you know, is that he would talk maybe about the upside of the earth. You know, the one is that invisible, you know, in fourfold.
Yeah.
The earth is the invisible one. It's but
Yeah.
one, not multiple. So in the design, infinite movement of coming is, you know, I'm detecting it in the design in what you're saying.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I'm not sure I have to think that through.
Through.
But what I'm getting at here, just in this very basic scenario, is that the one, which is the infinite, the zero, and the many is actually a segment. So the many is, let's say, identified as a segment, and the so-called one, the singular, is identified as the zero, and there you have the beginning of algorithms, 0 and 1s. Where 0 and 1 no longer is about if this, go that way. That version of computing, if yes, go there, if no, go there, is based on the notion of one being a singular, by which we mean only one element, and the notion of many being more than one element. Whereas when they realized and they began to create computing, that the one was in fact a something, and the zero was in fact that which stood for a singularity, that's when you can get a different form of knowledge happening, which they're calling artificial intelligence.
It's
Anyway.
why years ago I took a course in programming things. Probably everything has changed now, but I remember the first order at the beginning of each sequence was stop, because otherwise the algorithm would have acted continuously. So
Infinite Brooklyn, circle.
yes, it just it works. It doesn't. You need to put in a stop or a barrier, because I think of what you were just saying now, that the one is not a unit, but the segment is the something, and the one is infinity. Which precisely this. The one is the continuous repetition. And the segment.
But it's a very odd form of infinity, because it doesn't mean it goes on forever. It's the zero form of infinity. So it's like the black hole form of infinity.
Yeah.
Okay, so, or kind of what Oscar was saying, is like the, you know, it's the interior infinity, not the exterior infinity.
Hegel said it was the good rather than the bad infinity.
It's the good rather than bad infinity, yeah.
Infinity, which is the linear, and
Yeah.
it's the circular.
Yeah, that's right. What done? This is in a very good mood. Shall we look now at what it means to take a decision, or shall we go back to chapter 2? I'm so happy that we're at 5. That's very exciting. But, or maybe if we just look at the essence of the ground at the very beginning. And it's because it starts with my, oh sorry, it's chapter 5.
What's up on page?
On page, no page number, on page 173. So in this thing, this is my absolute favorite, all-time favorite quote from Wittgenstein. I'm so happy that it's here. And Wittgenstein writes, and this is in Remarks on Mathematics, and I came across this many years ago, and it was something that spoke to me, but I didn't know what it was saying. It was one of those kind of things. You know, I just loved it, and now I know why I love it. But the difficult thing here is not to dig down to the ground. No, it is to recognize the ground that lies before us as a ground. But the ground keeps on giving us the illusory image of a greater depth, and when we seek to reach this, we keep on finding ourselves on the old level. Our disease is one of wanting to explain. Now, maybe that's not as powerful and profound as I find it. But I was like, the aha moment happened for me, but maybe it's not aha for you. Does anybody want to give a stab at what that's saying?
I think that the first key is when it says that the ground that lies before us as the ground. This contains the whole issue of representation.
Okay. And what is the ground that lies before us as ground? terra firma.
Yes, and the certainty that whatever one takes as the reference point. If we go back a few steps in the afternoon, earlier you said that you were speaking as a marker that can install a logic. And I was thinking that the marker is a much broader way to understand the logic than something more functional like the principle of no contradiction or certainty, because certainty works in a certain way. If one says we need a marker, it can be anything. So it's already a completely open way of understanding logic. It's setting up a set of references rather than a strict rule or an essence. And now here, when he says recognize something as the ground, is because somehow what it means is that the way of thinking, not to say we all the time, is out looking for a ground. And before a certain point, it will find a ground. It's like being out looking for somebody.
A door.
Guilty. No. for somebody guilty of something. And like, if one wants to lay blame somewhere, sooner or later we'll find somebody who suits that need for laying blame on somebody's door.
But yes.
So I was going to say, it was what you were saying about when you started talking about terra firma, and I just was thinking of soil, literally.
Yes, literally.
You're digging a hole as you go down with it. Where are we trying to get to? Ridiculously, you could go right through the earth, you come out the other, where do you go on to?
That's right.
It's how you do it rather than what you're heading for.
Yes, right, good.
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
So yes, if you're digging a hole, you drop down with that depth. The ground, that keeps on becoming your ground as you go down and down and down. You go right the way through to the other side of the earth, for instance, to take the sort of ludicrous step, and then what?
Yeah.
Where do you dig next?
Yeah. Yeah. But then he furthers it by saying our disease is one of wanting to explain. Why?
That's the how, but what rather than how. The sort of idea is.
Why does, yes, that's correct, but how come he sees the digging as a form of explanation? Like why is it that he would argue, like for example, the remarks on the foundations of mathematics is not called investigations into the formations of the foundations of mathematics. It's remarks. He's given up the investigations. He gave them up after the philosophic investigations when he basically decided that was the turning point away from the Tractatus and the transition to where he is in this group. I mean, so let's try this again.
Well, it's to do reason. The disease is wanting a reason.
Running a reason.
Wanting a reason.
Yes.
But there is also, is what is discussed in chapter 1, the notion that one reaches the meaning of something by excluding all the noise and the dirt that lays on the surface. So another presupposition here is that A, things have a depth, and 2, that the depth is more important than the surface. So everything that is encountered first
is appearance.
Is appearance and should be discovered. You mentioned phenomenon earlier. Phenomenon, that which appears, is always not that which comes to the senses, literally in Greek. Is not the knower, is that which can be known. That's the difference between the two. So one gets some raw data, but it doesn't mean there is something behind it. Which means the coding, interpreting, that depends on what the model one takes is. So the whole presupposition that comes with the name ground to start with, and then with the idea of digging, is that there is something beneath that is truer and has more importance than what lays on the surface. So we already have this distancing and splitting of two things, language and its meaning, the signifier and the signifier, the now and the end, the telos one needs to reach, or the now and the cause
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, yeah.
I thought the way he used before there was key.
Where's the before?
So
No, before us.
yeah, because it's sort of it's not kind of like it's more like the before of the asymmetric before, I think, rather than just to kind of it's getting it in that way.
I don't understand what that means.
Well, so I take it he's saying, so what's difficult, like, it's not that it's difficult to get to the bottom of something like to find its foundation. It's what's difficult is to see that this groundless ground is what lies before us as the groundless ground. So I take that not it's like it's almost like the before should be in italics.
But before, he's in the English translation, I don't know what it is in the German, because we don't have that in front of us right now, but in the English, the way they've done it, before doesn't mean behind, it means in front, or that we're standing on it. It's that form of before.
Chronological, it's spatial.
It's a spatial before.
Yeah, but
Yeah, before us,
think
yeah.
it's more nuanced than just such straightforward.
It could be, yeah.
I don't think it's just saying like because of that contrast with the sentence before. He's saying it's not as if he's just saying no, it's not just recognise like the foundation lies before us. It's not like as a surface. I thought it was more like it's this. I thought it was more like to
I'm worried about that window, sorry.
Shall we try and shut it?
Yeah, do you mind?
I
Thanks.
think maybe,
You might need to stand on that. Anyway, go on.
Carry on.
Well, so I thought perhaps with this before, because you don't want to get into this thing like, well, this split of the past, the now, and the future, before in that way. So I thought that what they're trying to get at with this groundless ground is this before relates to sort of the radical difference of so it's before us in that way, in that it's ahead of us, in that it hasn't it could
Been
be
tackled
otherwise.
yet. Oh, sorry, I
In
didn't.
that it could be otherwise. It's not determined yet.
So,
it's like
so
you had a
say the
packet-
sentence with how you're reading it. Say,
So like it's the sort of contrast of the two. The first one is like it's not that it's difficult to find a foundation. It's what is difficult is to see this foundation that lies, which is a groundless foundation that lies before us as the groundless. I think as he's given it a different nuance there, but perhaps I'm just like.
Well,
no, I think that's true.
So are you sort of saying that, yeah, in that word, he's both saying that it's right there in front of you, but it's also pre-ontological. Is that the right?
Well, it's not pre-ontological. It's differently ontological.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understood what you mean. Well, it seems to me that is what you were saying in the first place.
Well, I suppose it's
It's like differently abled. sorry. Wait, before, I would just, because we're going to run out of time, I just want us to read the second paragraph. I mean, the Heideggerian paragraph. Jakob, can you read that?
Oh, do I? Okay.
Or we can have Siri read it.
He's going to have to go through the whole thing.
Oh, no, never mind. Okay, so.
Being is intrinsically ground-like. What gives ground presence as the ground has the character of ground, precisely because it is ground-like, ground-giving. It cannot need a ground. The ground-like is groundless. What grounds? Wow. what presents as the basis does not need the ground. That is, it is without something to which it could go back as something outside of it. There is no longer any back, no behind itself, but pure presenting itself.
Okay, can you just hand me that green thing? There you go. Can you read that again?
When you squeeze it, it looks like an apple. Because you were more perverse and like the apple of knowledge appears in this ridiculous
Very
moment.
good. Excellent. Okay, go on. What is it? Say it again.
It's a one sentence, isn't it?
Yes, it's a tough one.
It sounds like one. Being is
Intrinsically.
Intrinsically, thank you. Being is intrinsically ground-like. What gives ground, presence of a ground, as the ground, has the character of a ground, precisely because it is ground-like, ground-giving. It cannot need a ground. I get that much, actually.
Okay. That's right, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
The ground-like is groundless. What grounds, what
What presence is?
presence, thank you, sorry.
Right, no,
What
that's right.
presences as basis does not need the ground. That is, it is without something to which it could go back as something outside of it. There is no longer any back, no behind itself, but pure presencing itself.
Anyone want to translate that?
Yeah, I think the clues in the fact is from Shelley's treatise on the essence of human freedom, where Shelley tries to make freedom the ground of its being, and freedom is the ground. So if you change being to freedom, maybe it would read a bit differently. I don't know if that would help. He said freedom is intrinsically ground-like. What gives ground, presence is the ground, has the character of ground, precisely because it's ground-like, ground-given, it cannot need a ground. Ground-like is groundless. What grounds, what presence as basis does not need the ground. That is, it is without something to which it could go back to. It's back to as something outside of it. There's no longer any back, no behind itself, but pure presence in itself.
Meaning, but pure freedom of itself. Yeah.
And then you have Sartre and freedom and anxiety.
And Camus.
And then that comes back into Heidegger and anxiety and Kierkegaard and anxiety.
But there is, ground partially at least is metaphorical as well, because it stands for something that is absolute and something that one can hold on to.
No, it means something that gives meaning.
Yes,
It gives a security of meaning, let's say.
Yes, so it is that absolute element that does not change, that is not relative, that does not need other justifications, the ground that does not need any other ground to stand up. It's the base of the column, but does not need the floor of the building, which then would need the earth, which then would need what? The start goes all the way down somewhere. No.
Okay.
So there is this element of what is the end of I can hold on to that will guarantee that wherever I move and dance about, I can still not fall down to infinity into the abyss. So that's the ground problem, which in the previous paragraph, Wittgenstein says is not what we should be looking for. We don't have to look for that base, that handle, that thing.
I think they are quite opposites, the two definitions. For me, looks opposites completely. For one, say that you need to find the ground in order to make sense everything. And the first one is like, it's impossible to find the ground because it will be always another ground to sustain this ground.
Okay. No, they're not. They're saying exactly the same thing. Sadly. Okay. Okay. So, and they're saying exactly the same thing. It's just that Wittgenstein is criticizing the finding of something that comes out as being verifiable as requiring a certifiable thing that allows it to go forward to create its realism, its reality. Whereas Heidegger is saying that you don't need to start with a position where you are right here is the position. In both cases, they create a marker around which meaning gets established. So actually, if you read the, how do you feel like reading? If you read the first paragraph, can you read out loud?
Yeah. the difficult thing is
No.
So,
Sorry.
okay, as we have seen, Wittgenstein and Heidegger challenge a number of the assumptions and aspirations that have guided philosophy since its inception. One of these, fundationalism, is the attempt to trace all knowledge back to a source of set of claims that, unnecessarily true, secure the truth of all that is derived from them. Just as a valid argument produces only true conclusions from the true premises. So a properly built system insulates the circulation of truth throughout it entirely. As Descartes argues, if we don't know that we know what we think we know, then we may not know it after all.
Which I think is a very good moment to end the seminar for today. We're going
We
to
don't know what we know.
Sounds like Ramsfield's.
That's right.
No.
I know. We know what we know, we know what we don't know, we don't know what we don't know, we don't.
Blow it up anyway.
That's right, doesn't matter. Can we do this chapter for next week? I think that that would be very helpful. It's such a wonderful chapter. I mean, they do get into ethics, but I just want to say a couple of things before we end. That's why I wanted to kind of end it a little bit earlier. In presenting this kind of groundless ground thing, would it be helpful if we actually had Wittgenstein's remarks on mathematics and we had Heidegger, well, not necessarily a treatise on the essence of the human freedom, but basically his identity and difference? Would that be helpful to also read that alongside, or are you guys okay with just moving forward like this?
Having read both, yes, it would be useful to have both.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
It's massive. Like Shelley's book on freedom, so really it's taken me years to get
Yeah.
into it. It's not like you can't add, just add in more.
No, I mean identity and difference and
Oh, sorry.
mathematics, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that one of the things I worry about is when we start going off and saying, well, you know, this is where quantum physics sits and this is where this sits. I'm just worried that we're just being so broad that it's not going to be very helpful. So I want to make sure that this is speaking to the kind of work you're doing in your own work, so that we're not, you know, going too far afield, as it were. So the reason I'm raising this is because I think that if you do agree that is remarks on mathematics on the Dropbox show?
Yeah.
It is. Thank you. Okay, so I do think that if we're going to do that, if you could take a look at literally the first section by Joan Stanbach, who did the introduction to identity and difference, where she, I mean, you should obviously read Identity and Difference, but where she basically has the whole question around A equals A, this famous irritating discussion of A equals A, and how that begins to form the groundless ground on the one hand. And on the other hand, if we can look at on remarks on mathematics, yeah. Hello. Yeah, that's all right. Just how'd it go?
It was good, thank you.
Good. So if we could then, we're just winding down now. If you could also look at, do you have the table of contents in front of you on the remarks on mathematics? Okay, does anybody have? What did I do?
It's loading.
Oh, it's loading.
One second.
No, you're all going at the same time.
That's right. Anyway, wherever page 333 is in Remarks on Mathematics, that chapter is very useful to read alongside the essence of ground.
I believe it's a fragmented thing that goes on
Forever.
because remarks on mathematics is the second half of philosophical grammar. And they are in the same book, yes.
No, see right up there, that yellow one, the one on the very end. No, right there, yeah, that one.
No, this is the remarks on the foundation of mathematics.
Yes. That's what this is, remarks on the foundations of mathematics. So, using the old technology of reading an actual book, it's going to be part. Yeah, okay, so it's going to be, basically you're going to be asked to read part 6. But as it's all on proofs, proving a ground exists, basically. And it gets, actually, if you could read, okay, I remember this is the good part. If you could read sections 27 of part 6 to sections 35, including 35. So basically it's saying, how are you certain about the color red? It starts with that. So it's basically 4 pages. I mean, it's got a lot of sections, but don't freak out about that. So it's page 329 to 336. And the thing I find hilarious about the contents is that they're the most not complex, but the most, let's say, they're not like little titles that you see these days. These are like, they explain what's in the contents. So that's very helpful. Okay. Yes. Any questions so far? Well, personally, I thought it was good today. That was my. So we did get, this is our brain, exploding brain.
Can I suggest a movie that reminds me?
Yes, of course.
I don't know if you already watched it, but Donnie Darko.
Oh, Donnie Darko, yeah.
Because this thing of the time linearity and these kind of things. It's
About
interesting how the linearity of the time.
Linearity, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay,
it's
good.
interesting how they use cinema to explain these kind of jumps.
Yeah, it's interesting. I, of course, would suggest watching Battlestar Galactica, the more recent version, which is now not on anymore. Or you know what's also quite good is Life from Mars, is it? Life from Mars, I think it is. People don't watch television.
Well, I can give a really old one.
Okay.
NCIS. That's the most popular TV show in the world.
Is it NCIS?
Yeah. And there was one.
What does it stand for?
Was it Navy Criminal Intelligence?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's one. He stands there. And it's the beginning of the show. And they're putting the body into an ambulance, and then the ghost of that body is standing behind him, talking to him.
Right.
Then the whole thing goes back in time. The ghost goes with him back in time, but he's still talking as though, you know, it's carrying on linear. But he's gone back in time, so now the character who's being talked to by the ghost is now talking to the ghost before it is dead, while the ghost is still talking to him, which is just, you see what I mean? It's travelling back in time.
Yeah.
And it's the most craziest, to my understanding, trying to keep this story together. And it is the most popular mainstream TV program in Australia, here, and America. And I was looking at it thinking, how the hell did they get away with that narrative structure?
Interesting.
The ghost that goes back in time is then going and having a linear conversation with the guy who's now meeting the ghost. Heading towards its own death. And it was very,
the whole
very,
time
very
capsule
bizarre.
thing is interesting.
Yeah, very bizarre. But
You know, Doctor Who
such a
lives.
mainstream program.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Good, thank you. Okay, that's it. We come back next week. Excellent, thank you.